Does back to school mean back to germs? Many viruses were circulating over the summer. So what does that mean for the upcoming school year?
Kids, they like to share with each other. They like to be close to each other. They like to touch all the things that everyone else is touching. And so we often find that they just have this increased spread, one from being in close quarters in the classroom, and then because they can't keep their hands off of anything.
A pediatrician tells us what illnesses we need to watch for and how waiting at the doctor's office might be a thing of the past.
We felt like healthcare and the current way that we practice medicine is not serving families anymore, nor is it serving doctors.
And she explains how this is particularly beneficial for expecting mothers. All of that today on Mom Squad. Hi everyone, thanks for joining us on Mom Squad. I'm Maureen Kyle, and I'm happy to say my house is once again quiet during the day. All of the kids are back to school, but even within the first few days, I was running into families who had a kid who was home sick from school already, or even the parents were sick themselves. This summer, we didn't get a break from some of the viruses that we typically see peak in the winter. So that begs the question, what does this mean for the back to school season when all the kids are back in the classroom sharing those germs? Joining me today is pediatrician Dr. Keely Mistovich. We have so many germs and viruses that had been circulating throughout the summer. What do you think was most prevalent that you saw coming in and out of your office and with your patients?
So you are very correct. We saw a nice surge in many different viruses over the summertime, which is a little bit atypical for the summer. You know, we often think of it as everyone is outside enjoying the weather and things are a little more quiet. However, this year, not so much. So what I saw the most in my office was strep throat, and we also saw a surge in the COVID virus.
Yeah. Why do you think that we're seeing those peaks? Is that changing?
It's interesting. Ever since the COVID pandemic, we've actually seen an increase in strep throat, which has been quite interesting, and I don't have an exact reason for that. It seems as though maybe kids were sheltered for those couple of years and they just weren't exposed to all the viruses and bacteria that we often see them get when they're younger. The COVID vaccine, or excuse me, the COVID virus, we saw a surge in. The thoughts are, and you know, recently the CDC has also presented some similar data that is showing that vaccination rates have been a little lower since the initial vaccines came out. And we also found in the summertime that, you know, similar to in the winter when people come inside and they tend to have large gatherings inside, we also saw that in the summertime, people are trying to avoid the heat and are finding themselves inside and having large gatherings, going on vacation, lots of travel over the summer that tends to expose families.
I also heard from my own pediatrician, because my daughter had an issue with a cough that was persistent, and she said that I had to get her x-rayed for pneumonia because they had been seeing an increase in pneumonia cases. Did you see that as well?
Yes, we definitely did. Mycoplasma particularly is one of the bacteria that can cause pneumonia, and we definitely saw an increased rates of that over the summertime and sort of end of the school year. We were doing many more x-rays than I typically do at that time of the year.
Interesting. So then, like every parent out there, I'm thinking, okay, we've had all of these germs being shared over the summer. What happens when those kids are back in the classroom and sitting at the lunch table together and starting to be in more close quarters together?
Sure. Kids are often our vectors for sharing so many viruses, especially when they get back to school. And we find that, you know, kids, they like to share with each other. They like to be close to each other. They like to touch all the things that everyone else is touching. And so we often find that they just have this increased spread, one from being in close quarters in the classroom, and then because they can't keep their hands off of anything. So yes, we definitely see kids doing that way. As far as ways that we can kind of talk to our kids and help them maybe lower down some of the rates of spread, one is certainly at lunch, don't touch anyone else's food. Eat your food and only your food, and try not to share water bottles, try not to share your food and your snacks with your classmates is definitely one thing that can help. Certainly we always say washing your hands, wash them, you know, before and after you go to the bathroom, before lunch, after lunch, you know, after you come in from recess, many times a day, as much as you possibly can.
Right. Where do you think the biggest germ fests are? Is it the playground? Is it the lunchroom? Like, where do we need to really tell them to focus, you know, making sure that after they're in that one place or doing this one activity, make sure you go and really wash your hands?
I would say the lunchroom is top of the list, and probably second to recess. You know, you're out on the playground equipment and kids are running around and touching all the things that other kids have been touching. And so those two places certainly. A little less so in the actual classroom, and kids are sitting at their desk and they're kind of in a confined, you know, space more or less. But for kids who share tables with their other kids, then we tend to see a little bit more spread happening there.
I know that I've been in the position where one of my kids comes home and says, I have a sore throat. So when you start to see these, I'm going to ask you about some of the symptoms that we see pop up, because I always wonder, should I be really concerned about this, or is this something because of the environment, or, you know, like, let's wait and see. So at the moment a kid says, I have a sore throat, what do we do?
So sore throats definitely are one of the most common complaints that we see with kids, and certainly there are many reasons for that. Obviously, strep throat is on the list, and that's the one that most parents are worried about. There are also many viruses that will cause sore throats as well as allergies, which is a common thing that we'll see at this time of the year. So from the pediatrician standpoint, we are thinking about those, and amongst other diagnoses. As far as what the parents should do, it is okay to wait a minute before you immediately call your pediatrician and ask them to be seen. Often for strep particularly, we like to seek symptoms in kids for at least a day to sort of know what we're dealing with before we do any testing for them, if we want to have results that are reasonably reliable. The symptoms that tend to go with the various versions of the sore throats are, so often with strep, we'll see a sore throat. Usually kids will also have fever as well as headache and abdominal pain. And honestly, for strep, it can be any or all of those symptoms in some combination.
Got it.
The allergy side, we often see that more with some sore throat and combined with sneezing, with runny nose, sometimes with eye discharge, and so we see less of those types of symptoms with actual strep throat and more with sort of viral or allergy related. I'll often tell families it's okay if you want to try an allergy medicine and see if the symptoms get better, and that'll help you sort of know which way maybe their child's symptoms are swinging.
Interesting. I want to ask you about an old wives' tale, and I'm throwing this at you, but the gurgling with salt water. Like, the second a kid says, I have a sore throat, my mom used to just say, gargle with salt water. Is there any benefit to that?
So there is. You know, if you have a viral or bacterial form of a sore throat, then, you know, the salt water gargles can help to sort of get rid of some of those germs, and it certainly isn't harmful to do. It may or may not be helpful, but it isn't going to hurt anything if you do it.
Got it. What do you think are some of the other symptoms that, especially now, we should be paying closer attention to? Like, if a kid comes home and says, I'm feeling XYZ, then we really start to monitor.
That's a good question. Certainly, fevers are one of the things as a pediatrician that we pay the most attention to. But that being said, I don't want to scare people into thinking that fevers are bad, because they actually are not. And they are our body's way of helping us to fight infections. However, when we see them, it is generally a good sign that there is something that is not just allergies, that this is a more significant condition that we need to think about. So we like for families to sort of track them and pay attention to them, treat them if the kids are feeling really miserable from it, but otherwise use it as sort of as a measure to say, yep, I think my kid really has something. Let's watch this and see what happens next.
Another situation we always find ourselves in, there's a play date, there's a birthday party, there is a sports practice, and somebody says, oh, my kid's just getting over a cough. I think we've been on high alert because of coughs. Should we, you know, if a kid is still getting over something, should they be not going to practice, not going to that birthday party, or should we be concerned if our kid is playing with somebody who is still symptomatic?
Yes is the answer. So we want to, you know, I think COVID definitely raised our awareness of sort of trying to keep our kids out of activities when they're sick and keep them home when they're sick to avoid that spread. And it's still something that's important to continue to do. It depends a little bit on where you are in the course of your symptoms. When kids are newly sick and they're just developing symptoms, especially if that comes along with having a fever, you definitely want to keep them home then. There are some illnesses, particularly those that involve coughing, that can last for 2 or 3 weeks. And by that point, often kids are no longer contagious, but they just have sort of some inflammation that's causing their cough to linger for a little while. And those coughs are not contagious anymore. So it really depends on where they are in their illness. And it's, when in doubt, you can contact your pediatrician and ask them when the contagious period is over and you can return, and try not to make those decisions on your own.
Yeah, it seems like we always try to, and then,
right, indeed.
Then everybody always gets sick. Being exposed to germs. I know we've talked about it before on this show. Another old wives' tale maybe. I know that my grandma was like, oh, you gotta be exposed to all these germs to build immunity. Mm-hmm. So wiping down everything. I mean, I know I've dropped off canisters of, antibacterial and disinfectant wipes to the school. Is that doing a disservice to our kids? I mean, should they be standing next to the kid coughing every once in a while?
So that is a great question. And certainly during COVID, when everything was so new and we didn't really know what we were dealing with, that made a lot of sense. However, there is such a thing called the hygiene hypothesis, which is essentially saying that kids need to get dirty, they need to get sick, they need to get exposed to things, because that is the only way, other than vaccines, that you can build up your immune system. So if your child is clean all of the time and never around a sick child, there is no way for their immune system to actually build up and provide them protection against things. Mm-hmm. We cannot protect our kids all of the time, and so the best thing that we can do is allow them to be around some illness. Certainly there are exceptions to that if your child is immunocompromised or other reasons that are important to keep those kids away. But for the average kid who is otherwise pretty healthy, it's okay if they get sick once in a while. And honestly, it is. I often tell my patients, I expect your child to get sick at least once a month when they're in elementary school. That is normal and actually a good thing for them.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just a burden on parents.
Is,
I don't know if
any
parents were happy hearing that. After a quick break, decades ago, doctors used to make house calls, saving you a trip to their office. That business model is making a comeback. We'll explain. Welcome back. We've been talking to Dr. Keely Mitstovich about the illnesses that we need to be aware of now that the kids are back in the classroom. And she's among a new group of doctors who will come to your house when your child is sick. I do want to ask you, because you're with a group, Zest Pediatrics, and it's a very different business model than what we've seen. And it seems like it's very old school. Can you tell me about it?
Absolutely. You're right. We often think of it as sort of old-fashioned medicine and the way of approaching. Really, Zest started because we felt like healthcare and the current way that we practice medicine is not serving families anymore, nor is it serving doctors. As a pediatrician, in my previous life as a pediatrician, I was seeing, upwards of 30 kids a day. I had 3,000 kids that I was trying to take care of and know, and it was impossible. You can't do that as a doctor and actually provide good care. And so we have, we say there's something called the moral injury of being in medicine, where you want to be a good doctor, you want to provide care to families, but you literally cannot do it based on how the system is currently. And families experience that on the other side, right, where the waits are so long, you can't get in. And if you do, you don't even know that you're going to see the doctor that knows who your family is. And so we started Zest with the idea that let's make it simple. Let's make it about a relationship between a doctor and their patients, and that is it. Yeah. Okay, so the model sets up that we have direct access to our families. My families have my cell phone number. They can email me, they can text me, they can call me. If they need to have a question about anything, they can send me a message, whether it's my child's had a cough for a week, is it okay for them to go to practice? Right. Or anything else. We talk about childhood development, we talk about all the things that are related to raising a child, and it's simply like one phone call away. And there's no nursing staff, there's no middle people to sort of, I don't want to say get in the way, but serve as sort of a middle point. And so it's direct access to the doctor.
Wow. And you make house calls?
We do make house calls, yes, especially for newborns. And so for our families with the littlest babies, after your child's born, the last thing that any family wants to do is actually leave their house and go into a crowded and germ-infested doctor's office. And so instead, we come to them. And we'll see the babies in the hospital. We see them a day or two after they leave the hospital, and multiple times after that, to really meet the family where they are, to see them in their home environment where they are the most comfortable and also the safest for a new baby to be at home. And so we do house calls for that. We'll also do them for older kids if it makes sense from the doctor's standpoint to come to someone's house and see them there. We absolutely will do that as well.
Do you think this is a growing trend nationwide? Are we going to start to see more and more pediatric offices offering these type of services, do you think?
I sure hope so.
Yeah.
Certainly from the Zest side, we are in the process of opening more and more offices. We are expanding our model nationwide. The model of care is called direct primary care, and there are other offices like ours that are sort of scattered around the country. Our model is a little bit different in that we are developing a network of offices as opposed to just a one single office and that office running independently.
Yeah. And like you said, going back to what you were saying about the newborns, I just remember walking into my pediatrician and there was a seat over here for newborns, but then the seat over here for like the sick kids wasn't that far away. I don't know, maybe 10 feet. And I was always worried because she wouldn't have her shots yet or whatever. But the all-inclusive care with lactation consultants and with other resources for mothers, if you could just expand upon that, because I think that that's very important for new moms to hear that there are these resources out there. That I know my lactation consultant was only available for the 2 or 3 days I was in the hospital, and then I'd have to figure out how to find one on my own. So having that whole holistic approach, talk to me about how that might be beneficial to a family.
Absolutely. We feel like, raising a family is a team approach. It involves a whole support system to really take care of a child in full and also take care of a family in full. And so one of the things that Zest has done as part of our network, we have built out this support system that includes a lactation consultant, it includes a psychologist, there's a parenting coach, there are dietitians, and the list is growing of all of the people. And so as part of the Zest model, our families have access directly to hand-picked support people that we have chosen in all of these fields that the families can also access and have direct communication with, and allow them appointments with, educational sessions with, and so full wraparound support for a family.
Why dietitians too? Why include that?
Nutrition is something too that's very near and dear to my heart, and I feel as though families, and particularly young children, there's such little information of how do you actually do this for your family and provide a wholesome and healthy diet for your kids, particularly when often our children are picky and it can be very difficult to figure out how to feed them in the best way that we want to. And so we provide a dietitian to provide education to families to help them learn, how do I manage my picky toddler? How do I introduce solids to my 6-month-old? How do I manage my child when they are playing sports to make sure they're getting all the nutrition that they need and they're getting that they have the energy that they need to be able to thrive and do the best that they can. And so, interestingly, in medical school, we get approximately like 1 hour of nutrition education, which is ridiculous. It is absolutely absurd to me that you can become a pediatrician or any doctor and not have an extensive education in this subject. And so, knowing that these resources are so important, we have added those to the list.
I can't think of any parent who didn't have trouble introducing some sort of food or worrying about, is my child gaining the right weight, or they're gaining too much weight, or are they right on track? So it makes so much sense.
Absolutely.
Yes. What do you think, before we wrap up here, as we head back to school and we get back into routine, what do you think is the most important health aspect that families should be focusing on?
I think, one, I'm going to put a plug out there that everyone needs to get their vaccines. This is the time of year where we get our flu shots and we get our COVID vaccines. There are a new COVID vaccine that's coming out that have incorporated the most recent strains that we saw surging over the summer. So I encourage everyone ages 6 months and above to get your COVID vaccines and flu shots. So certainly that is on the list for preventative things that we can actually do that we know helps to decrease the incidence of all of these diseases, as well as RSV. That one's coming around as well. And now we have protection for our littlest babies against RSV, which is amazing. I remember as a resident, that was one of the things we saw surging the most in the wintertime, and it was very scary and dangerous for babies. So I strongly recommend that one as well. In addition to that, I think it's really important for families to focus in on making sure that your child are sleeping, that they are having a healthy, nutritious diet, that they are getting exercise, they're getting sunshine, and that we're incorporating all of these important things as far as just their general life and making sure we're setting them up for success in order to be as healthy as they can be as we enter into the cold and flu season.
Yeah, a great prescription.
It is.
All right. Keely, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Coming up, the CDC now says kids with lice can stay in school. Why they made this change and what it means for your child. Students with head lice don't have to stay at home. This is a new recommendation from the CDC that has some people scratching their head.
Why is the CDC changing the rules when it comes to lice in schools? Well, parents often complain that schools can be germ factories, with kids catching all sorts of coughs and colds from their classmates. But it used to be recommended that kids with certain contagions, like lice, should stay home. That's because lice is very good at spreading, especially when kids come in close contact. Now, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is changing its recommendation for lice in schools. Health officials now say students with head lice don't need to be sent home from school. They should finish the day, go home, get a lice treatment, and then return the next day. The CDC also recommended schools stop requiring kids to be free of lice eggs, also known as nits, before they can return to class. So why the change? According to health experts, while lice may be gross in most cases, it's not dangerous. Head lice do not spread diseases. Also, the CDC says students missing school because of lice can be a burden to kids and their families. Most cases of lice can be treated with an over-the-counter medicine, but you should alert anyone who may have come in contact with your child. With the Why, I'm Rekha Muttaraj.
Of course, whenever your kid has something like lice, it's best to ask the school their policy and contact a pediatrician. Thanks to all of you for tuning into Mom Squad. We want to hear from you. Join us on the Mom Squad with Maureen and Kyle Facebook page or Instagram at Mom Squad Show. That's where we share exclusive content, conversation, and we hear your thoughts about parenting. We'll see you next time right here on Mom Squad.